Hey, Natalie.
Hey, Kari.
We are back with another episode of Instinct, the podcast about leadership, one animal at a time.
So we've kind of inadvertently fallen in love with every animal we've discussed so far, or at least I've tried to convince Kari about how awesome they are. So we've decided to stretch the edges and select an animal for today's episode that most people just kind of don't really seem to care very much about at all.
Newts?
Newts.
Newts are semi-aquatic salamander species that, can casually lose and regenerate their limbs and also poison people and other animals through their skin.
Right. Like leaders. So if you're interested in growing your leadership chops, might we recommend this tiny but very powerful amphibian that knows a thing or two about resilience and defending itself in the wild?
Let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about newts.
I'm actually feeling really newt energized.
I feel like you started newt energized with this whole project. It's almost like we've been doing everything else just to talk about newts.
What? Have I really been showing my cards that clearly? I have to say that I thought I was going to be disappointed by newts, but I'm not that disappointed. Maybe my expectation was too low.
So for some reason, I thought that you knew a lot about newts already. Maybe it's the Natalie Newt thing.
No.
I just thought you were already an expert.
Not an expert, but now that you've brought up Natalie Newt thing, I feel like we need to explain what that means. So as you have heard, but our dear listeners have not, Kari, I, as a child, had this really frustrating, nearly traumatic experience growing up, which is that I would go on, field trips or whatever kids in elementary school do, or there'd be activities, and the facilitator or teacher or chaperone or whatever would ask everyone to introduce themselves using their name and an animal that started with the exact same letter as their first names. And my name is Natalie, as we know, and I did not know any animals that started with N, except for the newt, which is so lame compared to, you could be Kari the cobra, or what were you?
I'm pretty sure cobra starts with a C, but
okay, but let's not have a linguistics lesson. K and K are the same sound. This is phonology, not ortho. Okay, anyway.
Also, I've never, in my memory, never had that as an introduction prompt. So this sounds very special.
This is so Californian then. I clearly grew up in Northern California. So anyway, some people had Brad the barracuda or whatever. And I was like, I'm Natalie the newt. Just imagine how shameful that was for me. So of course I've, grown up, and now I understand that there's other animals that start with N, which any adult could have helped me with at the time, but did not, including the narwhal, which is pretty dope, and the nightingale, also pretty sweet, neither of which we're going to be talking about today. Today we're talking about the newt.
But I kind of understand why you thought you might be disappointed, and I guess my big question is, now that you've done some research, is it shameful or little to be Natalie the newt?
No, I actually feel like I'm going to reclaim newt. Natalie the newt, and we can get into why at the end. Maybe you can remind me to tell you why I feel new kinship with the newt, okay?
Or a newt kinship.
Slimy joke, Kari. Okay, so what kind of energy do you have around newts, just so we can kind of vibe check? Because we talked about elephants, you were one with the elephant. What kind of energy are you bringing today?
Well, whereas I felt kinship with the elephants, I feel so different from a newt, but I do not relate to newts at all. There's not a single part about how newts are that I see in myself. And I think they're amazing. And I started having this idea that was such a human idea, which is like, how do we extract what's amazing about the newts and like literally make it happen for us? Like, I want to like regenerate parts of my body.
Whoa. You're getting ahead of yourself. Okay, so now we know what you like about newts. I was just doing a newt vibe check.
Okay, sorry.
You're already going into teaching me about newts. So you
Hi-
don't have anything
hi-
in common.
High newt vibe.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
All right.
I'm really glad that I don't need to like be a newt advocate over here, and we can just start on good newt vibes to begin.
Yeah. How about you?
So since
You're a high newt vibe too?
I'm kind of like I'm excited to see what we tease out of this one because even though I can respect a newt, there's going to be some stretches here. I'm just going to say on my evaluation of how we can learn about leadership from newts.
Yeah. I agree.
Okay. So you gave us a little teaser. So why don't you begin? What even is a newt? I know we're talking actually about a lot of different, like a kind of broad term for where there's actually differentiated species. So like give us a lay of the land, Kari. What is a newt?
Okay, there's a bunch of different kinds of newts. I'm not an expert on the different kinds of newts.
Me either.
And I don't know what they all are. But I
Same.
did look at a lot of pictures of newts, and what I'll say is that almost all of them look like they're smiling, which is pretty cute.
They're smiling because they are toxic and they're like, come over here.
Yeah, they're like, come and get me. And there's also a viral picture of two newts. Did you see this?
No.
Anyway, I saw it, and it's like a post that someone put on Instagram or one of those places, and it's like two newts hugging, so cute, this whole thing. And there's this whole thing about like newts aren't loners, like they need friends, they love to hug each other. And in my head, I'm like, not to be weird and cynical, but it totally looks like they're mating.
And they are.
And they totally are mating. But like nowhere in this like viral post, like all of the Reddit threads, etc., did like the mating nature of the newts come up in this discussion. It's just like, look at they're smiling and hugging each other. Newts are so social. So then I typed in, hey, Google Scholar, tell me about the social aspects of newts. And it's like nothing.
Nothing except mating. So it's like instead of virality, really it should have been virility. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Great joke. And there is like a little like tidbit about the social nature of newts that we can get into. I did find like a little shred of something there. Okay. But okay, so essentially what I also learned is that all newts are salamanders, but not all salamanders are newts.
Right? It's like a square rectangle situation, or what I wrote in my notes was just like founders and CEOs. Like if newts are founders and salamanders are CEOs, in the sense of not all CEOs are founders, but all founders maybe at one point might have been a CEO? Question mark? Probably not.
I was like, actually, like I thought you were going to go the opposite way, and I was like, that's probably mostly true. But then,
okay, let's just erase it and pretend it didn't happen. Let's just stick with squares and rectangles.
Okay, definitely true about squares and rectangles. So I learned that about newts. Of course, they are amphibious, which is pretty cool. And they start out like little tadpoles, like little fish beings. And as they get older, they become more land beings, but they can always go back into the water, and their tails turn more into fins. And it's, a cool thing. Amphibians are pretty cool.
Amphibians are cool. I don't think I have totally appreciated the whole, like, first I decided I would breathe underwater. Then I decided, let's go do that land thing. But now I can do both, it is pretty cool.
And like in contrast to manatees, which can like literally do neither. It's pretty cool.
Oh, poor manatee. Okay, so they're amphibious. They kind of have these three different developmental stages. They start out kind of aquatic, then they go on land, what are they called? Terrestrial juveniles, also called efts. I learned that.
Oh, I didn't catch that one.
And then in their adult life, they go back into the water, but they go in and out from there.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's kind of,
anything else we need to know about what a newt is? Yeah, and there's something else about newts being there's a lot of different types of newts. They kind of have different colors. They seem to have different textures on their body. So some of them are kind of like bumpy. Some of them are more smooth. But on the whole, they're kind of like little salamander dudes and dudettes.
Oh, and I was thinking that there was something that I learned about newts when I was a kid that I remembered. I've always remembered. And then I kind of was amazed that my parents taught me this, but they taught me that they were poisonous.
Why was that shocking to you?
I was like, who like randomly knows things about newts? But I guess you want to like teach your kids what the poisonous things are. And so I was aware of newts and I knew how to identify them and I knew that they were poisonous.
That kind of makes sense. If you grow up somewhere where you're kind of nearby water, there may be newts. There probably are newts.
We had a lot of newts around.
Okay,
and I thought they were really
poisonous.
Cool. Yeah, they're totally poisonous.
All right, are there any other like important kind of like just lay of the land facts we should know about newts before we get into like why we think these are kind of cool animals?
Maybe we'll talk about this later, but the other thing that really fascinated me is that they're pretty small. I mean, you all kind of like know what salamanders, they're like, they're like this big or something like that. Mm-hmm. But, and that's for people listening, it's like 6 inches.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Maybe
they're
a
definitely
little
not
bigger
longer
sometimes.
than a foot.
Yeah, there are some bigger ones and smaller ones, but like kind of in that ballpark. Mm-hmm. But they live a really long time.
Yeah, they live like up to like decades, right? Like 15 years or something like that, which compared to say like the hummingbird, much shorter lifespan. So
well, we'll get into this later. I'm going to save my interesting tidbit for the interesting tidbit section.
Okay, well, should we go to the interesting tidbit section?
Okay. Yeah, let's just dive right in.
Roll right in. All right, what stands out to you that you want to give some attention?
Okay, so my two, it's a little cliche and I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't come up with something more fascinating about newts to dig into or like less well known, but I'm super interested in their ability to regenerate.
Right. And what does that mean? Like define it a little bit.
I was trying to think of what are those superhero movies where like the superheroes can like regrow, like they like their arm gets chopped off and then like regrow an arm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like newts can actually do that.
Yeah, which is really weird.
But like not just with an arm or a tail or something like that, but also like vital organs. Like they just like repair their heart or like they can
eyeballs.
Also their eyeballs, totally. They can also regenerate parts of their nervous system.
Why?
I don't know why, but it's pretty cool.
It's really cool. I really like the regeneration thing as well. And in my research, one of the things that gave me a sense of pride in the newt was the fact that the newt is actually used a lot for its regenerative skills in research and science about how we could apply or learn about like what is enabling newts to do that biologically, and then two, how that could be applied to like human medicine, for example. So like maybe like 100 years from now, we're not going to have like prosthetics. We're just going to have like newt technology and we can like regrow limbs.
Which apparently we have the same sort of ability, but the centers in the newt body that produce this regeneration, right? Like we're able to repair cells much more easily when we're younger than when we're older, right? It's the same thing that happens in newts, but their center for regeneration is 10 times the size of that in humans.
Whoa.
And doesn't seem to decline at the same rate as humans.
It's a good point. You're making me remember that like if I burn my tongue on my coffee in the morning, that like my tongue is not forever burnt. My what do you call those things? Taste buds will regenerate and it'll be fine. But yeah, it seems like a bigger deal when it's like, say, your appendage as opposed to your taste buds. So that's a good point. So they just have these huge, I don't even know what it is. Like, what do you mean the center of regeneration? Is it too sciencey for us both? Probably.
Yeah, it's like something related. No, I'm not even going to try. It was like way too hard. I read some article. Do you ever get into an article and you're like, I have no business being here?
Yeah, it's like they really should have put a sign on the door saying like, caution, do not enter if you're hoping for natural human language in this article.
Totally. Yeah. So that was one of those articles where I was like, I have no business being here and I should leave immediately. But I'm super interested in what it what it shared, and I did pull the English out of it, which maybe I can give you a quick rundown on that. Okay, so the stuff we already talked about, but I'll just like make it more complete. So that newts can regenerate sections of their body, so their ocular tissues, as you mentioned, jaws, lungs, hearts, brains, spinal cord, entire limbs, and they seem to be able to do this throughout their entire lifespan. So, okay, so cool. We already talked about that, but like pretty cool.
Like very few newts presumably are dying from heart-related disease, unlike humans.
Right. And it's not their only tool of staying resilient, which is also kind of fascinating. It's like they're poisonous, they can regenerate, and then they're also crafty in a bunch of other ways, which maybe we'll get into here in a second. Okay, so all of that is a thing. There was another thing that I read that I thought was fascinating, which is in a lab condition, it's predicted that newts could live up to 100 years old. So if they didn't have any predator risk and they were basically kept generally healthy, that their life expectancy potential is closer to 100 years old, even though even the oldest living ones in the wild tend to only reach around 30 years old, which is, I mean, newts. Like you could like meet a newt and it's been alive for 30 years.
Yeah, that's half of an elephant's life.
Right?
Respect to the newts. This is why I feel like they're kind of undervalued. Right? We think of them as just these like slimy little things that are not that impressive, but that's really cool. So do you think, do most scientists attribute the longevity to their ability to regenerate?
It seems like it's a bunch of different things, but their ability to regenerate their cells, in my research, seems like the most interesting or the most talked about feature. But then this other thing around their other resilience factors seem to be important. Also, the fact that they're poisonous and they just don't get killed as often seems to be important, right? You know, these kinds of things.
Yeah. One of the other things I saw about this regeneration business is that essentially what's happening on kind of a cellular level to our knowledge, I guess, today is that like cells kind of go back. Let's say you get your newt arm bitten off or whatever. The cells at that sort of site of injury or trauma kind of revert to like a more primitive cell state, kind of sort of like a stem cell. And then that allows them to basically be like, you know, baby cells of sorts, and then decide like, all right, now I can like rebuild as though I were just being born and growing this for the first time, which I thought was interesting. And then I read something about, I guess something called like, what is it? Blastemal cells, which are like, I'm sure I'm going to mess this up, but I'm going to describe it as like a type of cell that can become any cell. So, you know, it might be like a cell for an organ, or a cell for skin, or a cell for, like all these different types. Like those cells come back to that state of the injury, and then like it can become anything. So it's not just like the regeneration concept to me. I'm kind of like fascinated by the fact that cellularly there seems to be like a surplus of cell potential, right? It's like not just this specific cell, I can become a lot of different kinds of cells. And there's something like you're saying, like super resilience oriented about that, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Can we talk about these other resilience things? I'd be curious if you heard even more that I didn't stumble across, but one of them was that when they have a bacterial infection, which I guess when you're an amphibian happens a lot because everything's like kind of moist and
more, like funguses, among
warm, and like stuff is just growing all the time.
Right.
But the newts somehow know that when they get this sort of infection, they need to go somewhere that isn't moist and conducive to growing things. So they just become land newts until they're healed and then go back to their normal amphibian selves.
That's so cool.
So they use environment as a treatment. It made me think of the way that humans kind of like go to the mountains to heal.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was just thinking about how like underneath I have like a little watch here, and underneath there, like I got bitten by something not too long ago, like a spider or something camping. And then I like, because it's like always on me, I didn't really realize it for a little while. And then like kind of like took it off and I realized it was like a little infected because it was like too moist under there. So I like took my watch off and like switched it to the other side and like aired it out. So like, this is why I'm also feeling like a newt. something within me knew to get rid of this thing, I got to like dry it out. We got to change environments. So, okay, me and the newt.
Oh, and it's one of the reasons that they live longer than other amphibians, because other amphibians don't do this, despite having the same ability to live on land or in water. Newts
Wait, don't have the ability to like know that they might be infected by a bacteria?
I guess, I don't know. I didn't research frogs, but it made me interested, which is like, are the frogs just like sitting around being like, I'm dying? And they're like not going to the land. They're just like sitting on a moist rock, continuing to be consumed by whatever infection they have. And the newts are like, come on, man. Like, I'm in this field drying out and getting healthy.
What a mensch. We don't have the saying, you know, about newts in boiling water like we do about frogs. So I think that tells us everything. So back to the resilience mechanisms, there's this sort of awareness, I guess, or intuition to go on land. There's the toxins that they secrete that basically are like, eat me and die. There's their colors, right? Which like they can kind of seem to change, or there's variance among, of course, across species, but even within a species, there's like camouflage color orientation, but there's also like warning colors, right? Brighter colors tell creatures, nah, don't eat me. The other one, well, actually, I found two more that I put under my label. I think you called them like resilience techniques or whatever, but I called them magnificent defense mechanisms.
Nice.
The first was something called the Unken reflex, which is a great name. And it's essentially like, I get big to make other people scared. Well, not people, animals scared.
Other newts.
Other newts. And so like, I guess when the newt is threatened, it basically like arches its back and like raises its head and tail. And then it like exposes its bright belly, which is kind of cool because a lot of people, you know, like try to, not people, again, a lot of animals, we like try to protect our inner organs when we're in danger. So we get like smaller. But the newt's like, look at my bright underside. And then it like makes them look bigger and displays more of their colors. So there's kind of like a in context defense mechanism too that is about getting bigger. That's called the Unken reflex. Great name.
I wonder if that's related. I was looking at their mating tendencies, and one of the things the male newts do during a mating ritual, which, by the way, happens for days.
Yes, we have to come back to the mating, or maybe I'll just name it, but finish your thought.
Is that they do this Unken reflex as a part of the dating ritual too. And I watched a video of it, and the male newts actually they like look like bodybuilders. Like they do this thing and they like look ripped. You know, they look like these slimy little like cute smiley things that hug each other. And then all of a sudden they're like getting ready to mate, and they're like look like bodybuilder newts.
I love that. Don't make a newt joke here. Okay, so yeah, so they get kind of like they use their body in very showy ways to kind of get the job done, whether that's like trying to let predators know, no thank you, or trying to let potential mates know, yes please, so to speak. Yeah. And then the other one I saw was just tail autonomy. I forget exactly what the name of this is, but essentially newts and other salamanders, some species have the ability to basically like detach their tail if under threat. Did you read anything about this?
No, but this is kind of like a reptile thing too, right?
Yeah, this is a thing.
It's kind of like the stripping your sweatshirt when you've just like robbed a bank or something and someone tries to grab you.
Have you done that before, or have you read about that?
Neither, but I did learn about it in some ways.
Okay, yeah. I noticed you used like when you do yada yada, and I just want to make clear I haven't done any of that, but it's exactly like that. It's kind of like someone grabs you by the tail, you're like, I need to get out of this situation. So you might as well take my tail because I can regenerate it. So here you go. And it kind of like wiggles for a little while, even after it's detached, which is like so cool and gross. And then they're like, whatever, peace out. I escaped you. And then they just grow back their tail. So that's kind of another resilience thing that's related, of course, to the regeneration, but it's not just like an accidental regeneration. It's like I cut my own tail off, which is pretty badass.
Pretty badass. Can we talk a little bit more about this toxic skin situation?
Tell me what you want. Because,
okay, so the first thing that I read an article, again, I was almost had no business in this one, but there was more that I could glean from it. But at least in 10 different species of newts, they have the most poisonous substance known
What? Like
to us in their skin.
poisonous to all
It's
of
the most
them?
poisonous non-protein substance known to scientists.
Wow.
It's similar to what's found in pufferfish,
Okay.
which I didn't know anything about pufferfish other than they puff up,
right.
which is that same reflex. What is it called?
Unken.
Unken. So the pufferfish unken reflex is the same as, anyway, they have the same toxin also in them.
Cool.
And it's so poisonous that the skin of a rough-skinned newt is poisonous enough to kill 25,000 mice.
Okay, sorry. My jaw was open, but I forgot this is a podcast, so people can't hear my jaw being that open. That's crazy.
Okay, and then remember when we were talking about hummingbirds and there were those certain hummingbirds that had the serrated beak and I was like, those things are vicious. Okay, so there's also this super vicious newt called an alligator newt. Did you read about these?
No.
They dislocate their ribs when there's a predator around and they push the rib through their own skin to pierce their victim to make sure that the poison goes all the way in.
Wow, that's badass.
Brutal.
I'm gonna need to see this article. That's terrifying. What like physiological mechanisms, or like rather musculoskeletal? I don't know what mechanisms allow you to extract your own rib, puncturing it. Oh my gosh, I'm really feeling it in my body now as I'm talking about it. It's a lot.
Okay, and then I have one other poison skin thing that has nothing at all to do with newts.
Okay.
Other than the fact that the newt was involved in the situation, it's actually more of a commentary on how not smart humans are.
Great.
But there was a man in Oregon. I happen to be in Oregon at the moment, so I felt like this was a really personal attack on the Oregon humans. Anyway, this dude was maybe drinking a little bit or a lot, according to the article, and someone dared him to swallow a newt, and he was like, I'll do that.
Oh, God.
Okay. A couple of minutes later, his lips started tingling. 2 hours later, his whole body went numb. And then he had cardiopulmonary arrest. And despite being in the hospital and under a doctor's care, he died.
Wow.
Like, newts are no joke.
Okay, so rule number 1, do not eat a newt.
I mean, I didn't think that needed to be said, but someone tried it. And let that be a lesson to the rest of us.
Whew. Things just took a turn. Okay, I wanted to say one more thing about mating while we're in this dark place, because I actually think this is maybe a bright spot to me of newts, and I feel a little embarrassed that I'm going to say it, and I don't know if I want to apply it to human leadership, but I'm going to just go for it. Okay, so coming back to the mating, because I don't want to hang out in the land of toxic, venomous, whatever. So there's this mating courtship ritual you've talked about. There's like some tail flipping. There's like some bodybuilding newt action happening. But then what happens is, like, you know, most animals, there's like some actual insemination situation going on. But it turns out with the newts, the male newt does not actually inseminate the female newt. Instead, he drops like this little, I'm just going to call it like a little package of sperm. It's like, hey, I got this for you. And he just like leaves it kind of beside the female on the ground. And then the female goes and like basically picks it up with her cloaca, which is just like the reproductive organ, and then like inseminates herself with this little sperm packet. And
like next level consent.
Okay, so I'm so glad that sounds consensual to you, because I wrote on my notes like, wow, very consent forward and trauma informed newt ? And I don't know if I want to touch like the analogy to like what we can learn here either, because like, but anyway, I just thought that was really cool that there's like a way in which you're saying like, I'm doing this dance. We've agreed, but like, here, we're going to do this together and I'll just like leave this package. And then like you do your part and we don't even need to touch.
I was thinking like even before the mating ritual, so the newts are very chemically powerful is what I'm deciding. There's like the whole poison thing. And then there's also this pheromone that the males release. Did you read about this?
Yeah. Tell us more.
Well, apparently it's incredibly powerful. And in another point for consensual newt mating, the pheromone goes out and then it attracts the female to the male. So the males, we're like looking at other animals where there's like an attack situation.
Right.
That is not the way that the newts roll.
Right.
But this pheromone is so, I was like, is it like a newt roofie kind of? Because
they drug them a bit.
It's a little like a newt roofie because when the male puts out this pheromone, it's so powerful that if the male tends to be quite far away from the females will actually try to mate with each other because they've been whipped up into such a frenzy.
Wow, that's fascinating. That might be somehow involved, I'm totally making this up, with the idea also that many male newts mate with many female newts, meaning there's not just like a one-to-one moment. There's just pheromones abound. It's like a Woodstock newt roofie situation.
But everyone seems into it, right? And then the thing is like once they are kind of like locked into that newt hug that we referred to earlier, like they hang out there for a while.
Locked into that newt hug at the Woodstock newt roofie situation. A sentence that has never been said before. Okay, so let's summarize. We've got like incredible defense mechanisms, including like some cool toxic stuff going on, ability to make yourself into a magic bodybuilder, regeneration that just like we still scientifically don't quite understand, but we'd like to exploit as humans for our own good at some point. Some interesting like male-female mating stuff. We haven't really touched much on the fact that like, okay, these things are solitary. Let's be real. They don't really hang out much.
But I read 2 articles that really tried to convince us, that they're not solitary. So will you tell us about them being solitary? And then I'm going to try to counter based on what I learned from these articles.
Okay, here's my really strong argument. They're not highly social. They spend most of their time searching for food and hanging out in the shade. End quote of something I read, which again, I align with. I'm like, I like engaging in a hug now and then. I also spend most of my time searching for food and I enjoy hanging out in the shade. That rocks. I like going in the water. Then I like coming out of the water. Am I a social creature? Yes. And mostly solitary? Great argument, right?
It's pretty good. Okay.
What you got?
So let me just tell you how Natalie the newt might actually like having friends a tiny bit.
Okay, fine.
So I was reading an article. I don't even know if we can call it an article. It was more of like a newt advertisement.
Newsletter. A newsletter.
It's so good. So it was a newsletter from the animal hospital, probably trying to get us to adopt the newts, right? So like, let's just consider the source. But the statement is, and I
sorry,
quote,
I'm confused. Adopting the newts? Okay, let's get the quote first.
Yeah, it said, newts are great pets. Okay. So it said, and I quote, newts are sentient creatures. That is, they are self-aware and capable of forming bonds with humans.
Did we not just hear about how toxic they are?
It did say these are more like look and don't touch kind of animals.
Oh, so it's an emotional bond, not like a physical bond like you might have with your dog or a cat. Okay.
So the warning is, again, and I quote, don't put its tank someplace that is too dark or quiet. Your newt may feel ignored or get bored with the lack of things to watch.
And thus, this means they don't like being solitary?
So I read this advertisement and then I was like, let me go find an article that will actually tell me what's going on. So I read an article about the social nature of newts. And there were some scientists and they watched a pond for a while. Also, they're called pond animals. Did you know that that's like a category of animals?
No, I know.
Pond animals. So they were watching a pond and they noted that newts, and maybe this is telling, actually underlining your statement, I'm not sure, you tell me at the end, but that newts are more likely to not move away from familiar individuals than they are unfamiliar individuals.
Okay, once again, I relate. And I don't think that proves that they are social creatures. I think that means that they have some sense of familiarity and that they're like aware of and attuned to the potential of violence or danger. I relate to that as well. And on just the spectrum of like elephants live in herds, what's the most like, or the least social oriented animal we've talked about so far?
Newts.
Yeah, maybe newts, maybe hummingbird a little bit, depends. But even the hummingbirds will like take care of each other's babies if there's enough resources. So like I'm thinking newts are pretty antisocial at the end of the day.
Yeah, they don't even like cuddle puddle together for warmth or anything. Like they kind of just like do their thing.
Okay, so let's just call it what it is, Kari. To the best of our researchers' knowledge, newts are solitary creatures, and we don't, there's no shade, though they like it, on them for that. Okay, so that's what it is. Let's move to what all of this has to do with leadership, okay?
I'm ready to hear your stretches.
Okay, so here are my stretches. So let's go for the most cliche and obvious first so that I can run away from it after that. Actually, it's not even that bad. So the first one, we only briefly touched on it, which is like, look, newts have a metamorphosis process. They have these 3 stages. They go from being like little tadpole things to being these efts, which are like the terrestrial adolescents. And then they go as adults back into the water. And ultimately, that's like a huge metamorphosis process because you go from breathing underwater to like absorbing yourself, absorbing is a better word, your gills, and then like developing lungs so you can breathe oxygen on land, and then like growing out your tail and having like your feet do new and different things, and then you go back in the water. And I think that is like hugely, hugely cool and important for leaders, in my opinion, particularly because I wrote next to metamorphosis in my notes, like capital letters, know what stage you're at. So you and I work with a lot of like startup leaders, right? And have worked inside or led our own startups. And not all stages of growing a company are the same. Like the tadpole stage of becoming, well, really there's an even before that, which is like you're an egg, you're like super, super vulnerable, you don't exist, you're like wrapped in a cocoon of a brain of an idea, right? But the tadpole stage is very vulnerable, you don't have a lot figured out, you don't have a lot going, you're like trying to literally swim underwater. And then like, if you're lucky enough to even get to the point where you can like find your legs on land, you have to develop like a completely new set of skills, like growing a pair of lungs to take your company from like that first stage to the next stage of growth. I was kind of thinking of how some of the clients that I work with had to go from like being the builders themselves of their initial idea to like building teams, learning how to manage, building out programs and scaling things, like fundraise. I mean, just like completely different skills. So the tip I have, or the like, I don't know, the wisdom I'm taking from newts on this one is that like leaders need to know the stage they're at and then what they're supposed to be doing at that stage, and give it like enough time to actually develop. Your lungs are not built overnight, okay? So that's number one. What do you think of that one?
I love that one. It also made me think of maybe one of the superpowers of newts is picking the right environment.
Oh, so good.
Because if you are a tadpole don't go on land.
Don't go on land. Exactly.
Like,
Can
just
you give
don't
us
do
a
it.
story of like your own flops on that, or people you've worked with where you've seen them kind of do that in practice?
Yeah, I can tell you super vulnerably that I did this really recently. I'm totally a tadpole that was trying to walk around in the field. And I think it was because I kind of thought that maybe I had an infection if I'm a newt, right? I was like, ooh, I think I have an infection. I need to get out of the water and like go to the field. But I was a tadpole and like that was definitely the wrong thing to do.
Aww.
And so the way that it showed up in my business is that after Silicon Valley Bank failed, we had a pretty sharp decline in business. And we weren't really sure if it was going to be like one day where we lost a bunch of contracts and then everything came back to normal, or if this was like the beginning of the end for us.
Right.
And so I looked at a bunch of bigger companies, right? Like I looked at some adolescent newts and I was like, look at what they're doing. They're walking around on the land. I should totally be doing that. And so I looked into running digital ads. That's like what all the terrestrial newts were doing. Totally the wrong thing for the business that I run and like the stage that we are, and like also our ethos, and like, you know, and all my friends are like swimming around in the water and they're like, I didn't even hear the news because like I'm in the water, not on the land. And so that's an example for me of like being in the totally wrong location and just kind of reading the stage wrong.
Yeah. Okay, right. That's really telling. I think you're highlighting that it's not only like know your environment, but also like know you enough to know what environment you should be in. And just because all the other teenage newts are doing something does not make it the right thing for you to do.
Yeah. And I mean, also like all of my friends were swimming around in the water, right? So it's like I hopped out of the water to try and do something, and like none of the land newts wanted to even hang out with me because like I'm actually not a land newt, right? I was a tadpole.
Okay, so we're highlighting metamorphosis and then also like understanding your environment. I want to add to that second bit, like super strong environmental coping strategies in general for the newt to be able to be in the water and be like, no problem, go to land and be like, no problem. To me, the learning there for humans is actually about redundancy. And it's about, I mean, I've called it coping, environmental coping, but it's also about thinking about risk management in some way. You know, newts they seem to be like every other animal on the planet, which is not safe from environmental disaster and change that is human driven. The environment is changing. And newts seem to actually be better positioned, I'll say, than many other animals we've talked about because they can go in multiple different environments, water and land. And so there's something impressive to me about the redundancy that gets built in from like an existential redundancy, right? Not a, you know, operational redundancy that I think leaders could take some inspiration from.
There's also a thing that just popped into my head as you were saying this. I didn't think about it before, but the way that newts regenerate limbs, for example, is super necessary, right? As companies are moving and changing, right? If we lose a person, especially on a small team, we have to regenerate that limb with some efficiency.
Yep.
But what I see a lot, especially in early stage companies, is this idea as they get a little older, they don't realize that the thing that worked when you're a tadpole won't really work when you're an adolescent. And I see them trying to do a thing which would be the equivalent of a newt losing their arm and then trying to have their tail also act as an arm.
What does that look like in practice that you've seen?
Yeah, you're like, okay, so our CTO left. So we're going to just have our chief people officer like also stand in as the CTO.
So relatable. And then what happens in your experience?
So then imagine what happens if, you know, kind of a newt's like, yeah, well, my tail's kind of arm shaped. Like I'll just like swing it around and like plug it into my shoulder. And then the newt's trying to walk and it's like only going in one direction because its tail is like not doing its thing and it can't swim properly and it also can't walk properly.
Yep.
And yet like it kind of looked like it all worked, right? Like the hole got plugged by a thing that is kind of arm shaped, but yet it decimated some of the major functionings of the newt.
Totally.
Like
What's
walking
the
and swimming.
learning here, do you think, for leaders?
It feels like to me there's both a recognition that the vital functions of a business or of a newt need to be filled by the right kinds of cells. But there's also the other thing that is really cool about newts, which is that the cells that are present, right, can go in a lot of different places. But like the hole just can't be plugged by another thing. It has to actually regenerate. Like there has to be enough space and dedication given to it to create an actual competency and space filler that makes sense for the business.
What do you think are, when this goes well, what does it look like?
In a business?
Yeah. Like what are the regenerative cells that can like kind of become anything inside of a business?
Well, I don't know if I can say this for every business because I think it differs so much at the different stages. You know, like at a larger company, probably the strongest regeneration process that can happen is really good succession planning and coaching of up and coming leaders. Right. So like having a really strong team that has all the context and is being brought along into the meetings that they need to be learning the skills for, right? It creates a redundancy that isn't just being top heavy, but having a really dynamic and empowered workforce, I think is kind of the newt level regeneration possible at companies that are a little bit bigger. I think in companies that are smaller, it's keeping your generalists around longer than maybe you think. Because as the company changes, the people who are generalists, who you might start to think are, you know, not the best in class or not the shiniest object for your executive team, will continue to be useful throughout the growth stages of the company.
That's so interesting. You're reminding me of the difference between, or what I've observed on teams where like rifts or layoffs have occurred, is that often leaders who have to make those unfortunate calls say like, we have to lay off this team, which is essentially like we're cutting off this arm of the newt, so to speak. And their expectation is not like, and the arm will just magically grow back. Usually it comes with a like focused decision. Like we have to we're no longer going to be able to do that thing that we said we wanted to do. But if somebody leaves an organization, often we do the complete opposite, which is be like, put the tail where the arm is and just keep doing that thing, and like nothing changes. So there's, as I asked you the question of like, what's good look like here? It evokes for me this question of like, are you aware of what you're cutting off? And do you have a plan of focus of whether you expect that to be regrowing, no longer there, or a tail that's replacing it? And can you get honest with yourself about that regeneration plan, so to speak?
Right. And you imagine a newt, right, who's like planning their week, and they like catch a predator on the way to their pool party. And so they leave their tail behind, and then they're like, damn, like I can't go to the pool party because I don't have my swimming tail. So like I'm going to have to be a land newt for a week. Like that's a really reasonable accommodation to make while you're literally regrowing your tail, which is an amazing superpower. Right. But like you also have to like give it a week not being in the water probably to like let it grow back.
Right. That honesty of leadership about being real about how long things take is really hard. I think it's really hard. Anything else you want to name about regeneration as what we can learn from it?
I just really hope that at some point in my life, we figure out how to activate the regeneration potential in humans. And I also wondered this never happens, I don't think, in newts, or at least I didn't read about it. But I was like, do newts ever just decide that they would like to have a fifth arm? Or like, I'd like to have a unicorn horn, right? We have all these like amazing things. Like, do you think they ever just like use it for like a costume party or something?
I don't even think I could respond to that, Kari. I mean, the clear answer is I have no effing idea. But the less clear answer is like, would I attend a newt costume party? Probably. Can I share what else the regeneration reminds me of?
Yes, please.
So I'm going to take regeneration as a broad theme to mean rupture and repair, if you'll follow me, which is like regeneration is like the rupture of a vital, well, rather regeneration is like the repair of a vital rupture. It's like X got cut off, or my eyes no longer work, or my heart tissue is all crappy. I need to regenerate it. And I wonder what it's like to live a life as a newt, knowing that, first of all, injury or rupture is like par for the course, and that will happen. But then two, having the fundamental assumption that it will get repaired and grow back. And what I think this has to do with organizations and just individuals, like I am on a journey of trying to rupture more and more effectively and repair more and more effectively instead of like avoiding any rupture ever. And like that's been a very painful process. But I find most people I'm around and most people in organizations are pretty conflict avoidant. Most of us are more scared to hurt or be hurt than to hurt or, fight with somebody. Not everybody, but in a professional context, that's been my experience, is that most people are more conflict avoidant. And I wonder if people brought more newt energy to the organizations, if they would feel less conflict avoidant because they knew when my tail gets cut off or I remove it myself, whatever, AKA I'm in some conflict or I've ruptured or I'm not feeling good about some decision we've made as a company, I know that I would be able to grow back, or like the system of all of my cells, AKA my colleagues, we will grow this thing back together. I wonder how that would change conflict cultures within organizations.
I love that insight. It also just made me think that when a newt grows their limb back, it gets grown with more vital cells, right? They're younger cells. And I think it's the same in relationships. Rupture and repair creates a more vital or more intimate possibility, like right? A more resilient relationship.
Yeah.
And that's how businesses grow too, right? With a series of ruptures and repairs. So also, speaking of bodybuilding newts, that's how muscles grow, right? We like tear them down and then we build them up. And that is the nature of building strength.
Right.
Beautiful insight. I love that.
I have been, as I was doing my newt research, I really felt inspired by one of the organizations I've been working with. And I kind of want to share a quick story of the kind of big newt energy that I've seen them bring, which is around, I know there's a lot of people in fundraising in this season, and it's a really brutal time to try to be raising money as an organization. But this, I'm just going to call them a client. This client that I work with, one of the founders, they tried to raise a Series A, 3 to 6 months ago, and it was just really hard. And they ended up getting kind of an extension on their initial raise. But in the process of raising, they got a lot of no's, which is the nature of fundraising, but they also got a lot of feedback about like, what are the things that we would have needed to see as VCs in order to say yes to you. And, they told them like, your customers need to think of you as a painkiller instead of a vitamin. You need to know what the value is that you're delivering and be able to actually measure against it. Some standard startup-y things. And instead of being like, middle finger to these VCs, what I've observed in this founder is that they have basically systematically gone through all of those bits of feedback and have said, okay, to become more resilient, I actually need to check these things off of the list so that the next time I am raising, they are no longer problems for me, which I think is big newt energy, because I'm like, oh, they're like building up all of their defense mechanisms to someone being able to say no to them, right? And instead of shirking away from that, they're like, I'll develop shiny, colorful skin, and I will also develop like this toxin. And I'm like, we'll be able to breathe on land and we'll be able to breathe on water. And so I think they've done this like incredible job of knowing how to build up resilience in the face of the no, but also to know that the stage they're in right now and the stage they want to go in is going to require them to kind of like build new lungs to be able to get to the next raise.
Yeah.
So to me, that's what newt energy looks like inside of a growing organization.
I love it.
All right. What stands out to you, Kari, that you want to leave our listeners with today about the newts?
I feel like it's already been so rich and there's so many takeaways. I really don't have anything to add other than this is the one that makes me cringe a little bit. And I cringed when we talked about the hummingbirds being so brutal. But I also just thought, like, could we get some inspiration from the newts to dislocate our ribs so that we make sure that we kill those who are trying to kill us?
That's some big newt violent energy. I love that, Kari. It's very anti-elephant matriarch of you.
I know. But I mean, here's another thing. Not that, I mean, newts don't have ivory tusks, so like that's a whole thing. But like newts are not getting poached.
I'm confused about what you're advocating for right now. The death and destruction of our competitors and also human poaching of newts? That seems like a weird note to leave on.
I guess what I was thinking is that there are a couple of like pretty loud signals that newts send to the world, and one is with the colorfulness of their skin, right? Which is like telling everybody, like, watch out, I'm deadly.
Right.
And like there's something there for businesses, right? And like I sometimes hate it, and this is why I'm like cringing inside, right? It's like peacocking or posturing or whatever we want to call that. But like newts are doing that.
Newts are doing that.
It kind of works for them.
Fair.
And then if you don't listen to the signs, they poison you.
You heard it here first, folks. So set up your defense mechanisms, bring your know your environment energy, and be extremely resilient to like all environments like a newt.
And if it all fails, just
poison them.
Kill those that are trying to kill you.
Okay, Kari, as a final thought, I would like to receive some acknowledgement if you're down for it.
Okay.
Which is, I'm ready to take on my new Natalie the Newt energy, and I'd like you to share with me what you see in me based off of our conversation on newts, where we have Natalie Newt alignment.
Okay, I'm ready.
What do you see in me that's newt-like?
Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to say is that it always looks like you're smiling.
Aw. Sorry.
I'm not saying you're actually smiling because I'm not sure newts are actually always smiling, but it always looks like it.
Does it also look like I'm always hugging people, but I'm actually mating with them? This is awkward. Okay, continue.
That has not been the experience of you for me in the spaces we share. We'll let you deal with that in your personal life.
Okay.
I have seen you be incredibly adaptable. And I was even just thinking about you saying, you know, I really resonate with the solitary nature of newts, but yet you seamlessly adapt to social environments and being connected and being solitary and being creative and being business minded. And I see you spanning the environments in a very amphibious way almost all the time. I think it's one of your huge strengths as a coach is that you can talk the languages of lots of seemingly opposite or opposing skill sets as well as viewpoints. So it's very newt-like of you. I don't know if there's something around the regeneration, but I can't think of like what is the metaphor of the regrowing limbs. I hope that you possess that, and I just like don't know it because I'm really interested for you to tell me later that you regrew your heart or like a new ocular system or something. That would be amazing. But what I do see in you is resilience, and that kind of rupture and repair thing you were talking about. I feel like I see you navigate that, and not only quietly but also out loud. In sharing with others kind of when rupture has occurred and naming it and saying, I've lost an arm, and then moving pretty intentionally into what it looks like to regrow that arm with a lot of thought and care. So those are the newt-like characteristics I see in you, Natalie Newt.
Thank you so much. I feel very seen and very awkward in my face now as I receive the compliments that I have asked you for, but I will take them in to my little Natalie Newt heart, and they will regenerate me for the rest of today.
Oh,
thanks, Kari.
Newt heart. Thanks, Natalie Newt.
See you the next time.
Bye.
Thanks for joining this week's show. Credit to Zach and the team at Supermix for helping us make this show sound professional.
If you want any more deets on us, the podcast, or past episodes, visit us at instinctpodcast.com. There you can leave us a note or a review. We'd love to hear from you.
And of course, if you liked this episode, please subscribe everywhere, wherever you get your podcasts.
See you next week.
Thank you.